Late round picks in your dynasty startup are basically a scratch off ticket. They're not going to cost you much. You could win thousands of dollars or you could end up throwing them in the trash. But either way, Jeff Bell and I, we are going to talk today about our favorite late round values. We did our early round values last week. Earlier this week, we talked about mid round values. So as you guessed, now we're talking about the late round values. We're going to be looking at players on keep trade cut valued outside of the top 120 players. Jeff, what is it that you're looking for when you're trying to draft one of these guys in the late rounds of your startups?
Well, you can hit the bingo card if I say contingent upside, but really what you're looking for is players that have contingent upside, the players that can recognize value off of where they're selecting them, that they're down there for whatever reason it might be. And usually my favorite reason why they're down there is because people have simply decided something that could be wrong. And when it's not wrong, or when they are wrong, then you get value there. And so I think that that's really what you're looking for late. You're looking for players that their situations can change, or for whatever reason why you're still willing to go to the well when a lot of people won't be willing to go to the well anymore, and you can recognize a lot of value off of that.
And I think that's a great segue to the first guy that we want to talk about here. As always, as we've done the last couple of episodes, Jeff and I kind of ping pong back and forth. Jeff had the first pick, then went to me, and back and forth and back and forth. And Jeff, the first player you picked, you talk about somebody that you think everybody just has these ideas that could be wrong. So talk to me why you think people might just be wrong on Quinton Johnson.
Yeah, so again, we are looking at best value. So anybody after pick 120. And so I think I see Quinton Johnson sitting here, wide receiver 72, 187 overall on keep trade cut. He was wide receiver 37 last year. He was one of, I think there were about 14 different players who had 55 receptions, 700 yards, and 8 touchdowns. And so again, returning a wide receiver 37 value, a first round pick, a size speed guy that his size speed has translated to the NFL level, there is no real reason for him to be wide receiver 72 in dynasty rankings. He's way behind guys that have just not done anything at all to this point. And so I've seen a lot of narrative conversation around him about, I don't like to bet on year 3 breakouts from first round picks and things like that. He broke out last year. I just don't know what people are classifying as a breakout. But again, when there's a very small list of receivers, and again, you're bending some of those thresholds because that is what makes Quinton Johnson look good. But very few players did a 55, 708 last year like Johnston did, and he was wide receiver 37 in our fantasy scoring last year.
And we get this, for lack of a better term, an echo chamber where a lot of people are reading the same content, watching the same content, and listening to the same content. And I don't know who put the idea out there sometime mid-season or at the end of the season that a lot of Quinton Johnson's plays came on broken plays. A lot of his big touchdowns, he was wide open on an island and he was able to catch the ball and run in for an untouched touchdown. And I've seen that a lot on Twitter. And almost anytime I tweet anything about Quinton Johnson, 50% of the replies are going to be talking about his broken play rate. And sure, we'd like to see guys that can win in a phone booth and guys that are just going to beat their man in press coverage. But he doesn't have to do that. That's what they have Ladd McConkey for. Ladd McConkey draws the defensive gravity and allows for these big plays where Quinton Johnson, this guy who is, I don't know off the top of my head, was it like 6'3", and he runs like a 4.35 or something? Like you said, a size speed guy. He's able to make these big plays because the defense is forced to cover Ladd McConkey, and that's why we could see this happen again next year. So it does seem like there's just this parroted opinion among a lot of fantasy and dynasty players that Quinton Johnson isn't going to be able to replicate what he did last year, but there are so many outcomes. Maybe he just takes a step forward. Maybe Trey Harris draws even more defensive gravity, opening up even more broken plays for Quinton Johnson. At the end of the day, this is a 23-year-old first-round pick on a very good offense. Like you said, finishing as the wide receiver 37 and being valued as the wide receiver 72, that is just an obscene misprice in my opinion. Jeff, the guy that I'm going to talk about, I just talked about on a show earlier this week with Alfredo Brown. We were talking about potential breakout players, and I love betting on these year 2, year 3 running backs. Taj Spears now going into year 3, and to be honest, it hasn't been great so far. There's been some injuries, and he has been in the shadow of Tony Pollard, but in the one opportunity that he got last year as a starter, 20 rushes, 95 yards, 4 targets for another 8 yards. That's over 100 scrimmage yards, and he looked good. And we've seen this guy just has that jitterbug ability. When he's out in the open field, guys can't get a hand on him. He's consistently just slipping away from defenders and breaking tackles. And we have to remember, he slipped a little bit in the draft. He was the RB5 of that 2023 class that had a lot of really good running backs coming in, but he slipped because of medical concerns. Literally does not have ACLs in his knee. But a fully healthy Taj Spears probably would have been drafted right behind Bijan Robinson and right behind Jahmyr Gibbs. Instead, he fell behind Zach Charbonnet and fell behind Kendre Miller, but still a very talented player who has now checked the medically able box since being in the NFL. Tony Pollard now in the last year of his deal. There's potential contingent upside this year. If Tony Pollard has to miss any time and Taj Spears gets to step in, we could see him take over as the lead back going into the 2026 season. We could also just see a better Tennessee Titans offense now with Cam Ward under center as opposed to Will Levis, where both Pollard and Taj Spears can be involved. At the end of the day, though, just a talented player, still just 23 years old. I want to bet on young talent, and Taj Spears is that, and you can get him for so cheap. Right now in Keep Trade Cut, he's being valued as a 10th round pick and the RB39 going off the board.
Yeah, so fantasy playoffs, weeks 15 through 17 last year. Taj Spears was running back 5 through the fantasy playoffs last year, and he was given an opportunity. He fell into the doghouse last year to begin the season, and that allowed Tony Pollard with the new coaching staff to kind of solidify himself as the top back. I think that there were intentions from the coaching staff to use them as a dual threat backfield throughout the season. There were some practice reasons, maybe some personality reasons with that staff of why Taj Spears was not utilized in that way. But what happened throughout the course of the season, Tony Pollard wore down. And I think that the Titans recognized that. And then not only did Tony Pollard wore down, Taj Spears grabbed that opportunity when he got it. And so I think that this is a great call out here because I'm curious right now, is he like valued less than Tony Pollard? I think probably he is.
I'm going to start up right now where Tony Pollard went 2 rounds before Taj Spears, and Tony Pollard, 28 years old, Taj Spears, 23. I don't have the ADP off the top of my head, but in the one startup that I'm in right now, I just looked over at the draft board and there was a 2-round gap between the 2 running backs.
Yeah, so Tony Pollard's sitting right now at running back 35 and at 129 overall. And so you're looking at a full round later, basically, for Taj Spears, the 5-year difference. And to be honest, it would not shock me to see Spears pull ahead of Pollard in the backfield as soon as this season. So I love that call out. I think that that's a really good value there.
Now, this next guy that you want to talk about, Jeff, I'm pretty upset. This was a snipe. This was a guy that I want to talk about. Through all of our listener leagues, I was getting this guy really, really late. Now he's starting to creep up a little bit. Took him in this other startup that I'm in right now in round 14, which is way ahead of his ADP and still feels like a huge value. Talk to me a little bit about Daniel Jones and why you're going back to the well now in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, this is a player that we have seen him return quarterback 1 seasons in fantasy before. And so now he's stepping into the most talented situation he's ever been in. I mean, he didn't get to play for the Vikings, really. So I think that the Colts now are arguably the most talented receiving core that he's ever played with. And so you're adding that on there. You're giving him a chance to reset. And we've just seen this. We've seen this, Geno Smith kind of being able to revive his career. We saw Sam Darnold last year. We saw running back Saquon Barkley get out of the Giants offense and go out and do some pretty good things in an Eagles offense with some better supporting cast there. And so you're getting Daniel Jones, who has produced when given opportunity. He does have a skill set that can translate into being a very good fantasy quarterback in his best situation of his career. And it's free, basically. He's quarterback 33. He's 167 overall. And I think the biggest thing that you're looking at here as you're playing Dynasty, and we're seeing it again with the Sam Darnold concept last year, you're getting Jones as a quarterback. He's 28 years old. This is a quarterback needy league. And so I think that a lot of times these players that can be forgotten about, or they can be, this is, again, kind of the theme of this show is opinion being wrong and being able to capitalize off that opinion being wrong. There's a chance that Daniel Jones is the Colts starting quarterback moving forward, that he just takes that job and goes with it, and they roll with him for the next 5 years.
And if not the Colts, we just saw Sam Darnold, got his year with Minnesota, look great, and then gets another opportunity with Seattle. Similarly, we saw Geno Smith. Granted, he got a few years in Seattle, but now still, I think a lot of people saw that 1-year breakout, thought it was Fugazi, and now here he is 4 years later, starting on a different team, and still has value there. Daniel Jones still relatively young, too, 28 years old. Yeah.
Well, I think too, if you just look at the last handful of years, if you just bet on these players, you would have Baker Mayfield, you'd have Geno Smith, you'd have Sam Darnold, and that looks pretty good right now. And the guys that it didn't really work out for, that list feels a little bit smaller than the guys that it kind of has worked out for.
Yeah, and it wasn't that long ago that Daniel Jones seemed like it was starting to come together. That year before he tore his ACL, he was the QB9 in fantasy football, and that was with no supporting cast. I mean, he was throwing to Darius Slayton and Isaiah Hodgins.
Mhm.
I can't even remember the other guys that were on there. I mean, it was easily the worst wide receiver room in the NFL, and he gave us a top 10 finish. Now we're looking at him in a Shane Steichen offense behind a good offensive line. We know the type of quarterback that Shane Steichen likes. He's the one that helped developed Jalen Hurts and then went out and selected Anthony Richardson. Now, I don't think Daniel Jones is as good of a rusher as those two guys, but he does have some rushing abilities. They're going to get him out on bootlegs. They're going to get him in space. The rushing upside is going to be there, and he has much better weapons around him. So at worst, this kind of feels like an arbitrage Justin Fields in a way. Like at worst, you're getting a guy who has potential top 10 upside this year. And at best, you're just getting a huge discount on a guy who is just starting the second act of his career. So love that call out. And like I said, a little bit upset that you sniped him from me. I purposely picked a guy that I think probably would have been on your radar with my next pick, Mark Andrews, right now being valued as the tight end 13, Jeff. This is crazy, going 129th overall in dynasty startups. He was a tight end 5 last year, Jeff. Like the reports of his demise have been greatly exaggerated, and we just have goldfish brain, and I'm victim to it. You're victim to it, but I think as a whole, the entire fantasy community is victim to it. And what we saw in Week 1 was Mark Andrews in a primetime game give us absolutely nothing. Finished outside of the top 30 in tight end. Well, Isaiah Likely came out and had this huge game and finished as a top 3 tight end. From that point on, though, the tables completely flipped, and Isaiah Likely was the afterthought in the offense. Mark Andrews did what he always does, finishes the tight end 5 on the year. But then, of course, we also remember in the playoff game, he had a brutal drop in the soaking wet, cold conditions, dropped the ball at the goal line, and people remember that week 1 that burned a lot of people, and they remember that playoff game where his drop cost the Ravens a valuable win. But at the end of the day, this guy is still in the prime of his career for tight ends, and one down year due to a preseason car accident where he missed almost all the preseason, struggled to get up to speed the first couple of weeks in the season, but we still saw him by the end of the year stepping up as that dominant tight end that he's always been. Right now, getting valued at tight end 13, Jeff, I think it's absolutely crazy. He's tight end 6 in my dynasty rankings. I've got him at tight end 4 in my redraft rankings. I just don't understand how he has fallen the way that he has.
Didn't Lamar Jackson just say something to the effect of basically people are being mean to Mark Andrews and we're going to make sure that that doesn't happen anymore? Like it was something like that effect that I think he just
I,
kind of had a soundbite about.
I did hear the Eric DaCosta line where they said something like, so these Mark Andrews trade rumors. And he was just like, what is this? Like, this is not coming from inside the organization. We're not trading Mark Andrews. He's very important to this offense. And it's just one of those things, trade rumors and injuries and age and Isaiah Likely and a slow start and a playoff drop. When I said I don't understand why he's fallen the way he does, I do understand why he has fallen because people are very overreactionary. But don't fall for it. Mark Andrews still a smash pick. You're still getting another 2, 3, maybe even 4 or 5 years of good production, and you're getting him at a steep discount now.
Well, and I think some of the theme of this show is basically narratives that can be wrong. And I think one of the things that I see a lot with Mark Andrews is people pointing out, well, what if his very high touchdown rate comes down a little bit? And my thought is, okay, well, you can entertain that, but what if he just starts to get targeted like Mark Andrews again and starts to have a healthy season and gets treated like a high-end elite tight end and a very, very good offense again? I think that there's just a lot of value that can be returned here. This is a good pick on your end, and you're exactly right that this would have been on my radar.
All right, Jeff. This was a snipe fest. This entire one, as we were going back and forth. I think you and I, it really isn't fun being in dynasty leagues with you because we have a lot of the same late round targets. And this guy that you're about to talk about right now was another guy that was on my radar that you took from me.
Yeah, this is Tyler Algier here at running back 54, 181 overall. Again, we're looking for our favorite values. And when I see Algier, this is a very clean backfield. And
Mhm.
Algier plays even with Bijan Robinson. If Bijan Robinson were to miss time, right now, as you're listening to this or watching this, can you name Falcons running back off the top of your head that other than Tyler Algier? And that's kind of the way to take this, to go with this direction here, because should Bijan
I'm stumped.
Robinson miss time, we're talking about, yeah, I mean, it's like Jace McClellan, and then I think maybe Carlos Washington might be still hanging around there. But really, if
Elijah
Bijan
Dotson.
Robinson, yeah, if Bijan Robinson were to be out of this offense, you're looking at 20 to 25 touches for Tyler Algier easy. And the other side of it is he's a little bit older than probably what you want to look at, but he's also playing in a free agency year. And again, the Falcons are one of my training camp teams, so I follow a lot of beat writers around the team. I end up consuming a decent amount of Falcons content, and the conversation's already going on of basically, well, we need to find another backup running back because we're not going to be able to pay Tyler Algier once he hits free agency because he's a good player. And it's
Right.
really, he's a forgotten about piece, running back 54 overall. So he's going to, again, if Bijan Robinson misses time, just a ton of contingent upside, that this is a guy that you're going to be talking about being a potential weekly top 12 running back option with Robinson out of that lineup. That is going to hit a free agent market that he could be like a Javonte Williams or something like that, where he
Tony
finds
Pollard,
a team
maybe.
that is willing. Yeah, a Tony Pollard finds a
Where
team
he was
that's
buried
willing to make
behind
him a
Zeke.
starter.
And, yeah.
Yeah, like Washington, like you could see him stepping in as the Commanders' starting running back next year, and or other teams like that. And so there's just a lot of opportunity here to be able to return value. And I think one of the easiest areas in Dynasty to reap value, take for example the Brenton Strange, Evan Ingram last year, and if you looked at the contracts, you could see, well, they took Brenton Strange in the second round. Evan Ingram has this massive balloon built into the back of his contract. They're either going to have to restructure his deal or he's going to get cut. They've already drafted his replacement in round 2. What happens? He gets cut, so they don't have to pay that extra year. All of a sudden, Brenton Strange is the new hotness. Yep. Meanwhile, a year ago, he was completely forgotten about. He was like tight end 52, tight end 55, like that range, absolutely free. And those are just the littlest things that you can pick up in Dynasty. I hear it all the time that there's no edges left in fantasy football. I'm telling you, Brenton Strange is a glaring edge right there. That was available last year. Nobody was calling it out. And then now Tyler Algier is another one of those types of examples.
And I think this is where the edges do lie. That's probably the selling point that we should have started the show with. Like, sure, we can sit here and say, like, Caleb Williams over Patrick Mahomes. And if you're in a startup and you're drafting 8th overall, maybe that's a little edge that we think you can get. But at the end of the day, it's these guys that are grossly mispriced that we're talking about as the RB50 and can be inside the top 20 running backs next year. Like you said with Brenton Strange, valued outside of the top 50, shoots up in value. And I think that's a pretty good segue to the guy that I want to talk about next. Rashad Bateman is a guy who I think still has a lot of room to grow right now. Looking at his ADP, he's going 139th overall as the wide receiver 57. Much like you talked about with Quinton Johnson, we saw a good season from him last year. He finished as the wide receiver 34 last year. And this is a guy that we were so excited about coming into the league. First round pick, off the charts athleticism, has the size to be an X receiver in the NFL. And it was just injuries after injury after injury. A little bit reminiscent of Jameson Williams. We just never a very good prospect that never put it together in his first couple of years. Now he finally did. And for whatever reason, the market just hasn't budged. And they say, well, Lamar Jackson's going to regress and Mark Andrews is going to be more involved. And now Isaiah Likely is there and there's not going to be enough to go around. Maybe that's true, but the Ravens consider him to be a key part of their offense. They've now extended him in back-to-back years. He's going to be tied to Lamar Jackson until he's almost 30 years old. This is just a player that I want to bet on. Things can change in Baltimore. Mark Andrews could end up in a new team. Isaiah Likely could end up in a new team. There's so many things that can change. At the end of the day, we finally saw Rashad Bateman healthy for a full season. He gave us a wide receiver 3-year, still just 25 and tied to this offense for multiple years. I want to draft him where I can because I think we're going to continue to look at him as this guy that can just break the field with his speed and being able to get behind defenses. And he's a part of a good offense. That's something that I want to bet on.
Yeah, and I think that we're just scratching the surface with the upside of Rashad Bateman. And
Yeah.
Full disclosure, I had taken Bateman with the pick that I ended up using Quinton Johnson. I changed my mind afterwards. We don't have
I was happy you did.
rules around this, and so I let Bateman go. But it's the same conversation, and really breaking it down, similar draft capital. Bateman and Johnson's 2 years younger than Bateman, 2 years fewer into his career, and you can get him wide receiver 72 relative to Bateman being wide receiver 57.
Better value. Yeah.
well, we're finding values, and so, but I love this call out, and I think that you're exactly right, and I do think that we're really scratching the surface on Bateman. You remember the George Pickens trade right after that was done? There were stories that came out that Rashad Bateman was the Cowboys' first target, that they tried to get
Mhm.
Rashad Bateman before they moved on to George
And the
Pickens,
Ravens said, heck no.
and the Ravens said, "Yeah, no, we're not doing that." And then they
Yeah.
gave him a contract right afterwards, and multi-year contract, decent money there. And so, yeah, exactly. I think that there's a lot of upside in Bateman. And you talk about the contingencies of should a player miss time, what happens there? I mean, he could be
Yeah.
1,000-yard receiver without anybody missing time. Like that is within the range of outcomes here.
But I think the contingent upside, God forbid, say Flowers has to miss some time, then Rashad Bateman gets to step in as that number one wide receiver, probably more like a number two behind Mark Andrews. But either way, like we've seen what the upside for receivers can be in this offense, and he is still a young, talented player, great prospect profile. And now I don't know if it's that he's changed his training or his diet, whatever it is, but he's staying healthy now, and that's what we want to see. So another really easy pick for me to make in late rounds. Jeff, back over to you.
Who's the wide receiver 3 for the Ravens?
DeAndre Hopkins, maybe.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, they did add DeAndre Hopkins. Okay, yeah, guy name we know. All right, all
Yeah,
right.
he's around. Yeah,
I'm gonna go
Isaiah
with
Likely is the real wide receiver 3.
all right. So Dave this is my last pick here. I've not taken a tight end yet, just to tip my hand. I'm going to take a tight end because we do have rules around this thing that we are doing right here. And so I'm going to take Pat Freiermuth at 161 overall, tight end 20. And this is just fascinating to me that Pat Freiermuth is tight end 20 in Dynasty rankings, 161 overall. He was a tight end 1 last year playing with
Mm-hmm.
or Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. This is obviously a pro Justin Fields show, but now he's playing with Aaron Rodgers, and they don't have a wide receiver 2 there as so much as they've got some guys that they like maybe, but I think that it's very easy to project Freiermuth being the number 2 target for Aaron Rodgers. And contrary, again, narratives that might be wrong, Aaron Rodgers played a little bit better football last year than a lot of people realize, and especially the second half of last year,
Yep.
Aaron
Yep.
Rodgers played a lot better football than people recognized last year. I don't have any doubts or concerns about Aaron Rodgers getting the ball to his playmakers still at this stage. And maybe I just finally caved, Dave. I watched Enigma, and so I kind of rather enjoyed that. So maybe I'm just on the ayahuasca right now, going with Pat Freiermuth here. But I think that this is just a great call out here at tight end 20, a guy that should be able to return a tight end 1 season. And, he's 26 years old. Like
I know. Not even
it's like,
near the peak for a tight end.
yeah, he's like just stepping into the tight end, like prime production window. And I think it's fascinating and probably maybe some of the concept around the show, but it seems to me that in Dynasty, what I see a lot is basically players are no longer that young mystery box that everybody's excited about. Just at the right moment when coaches are willing to give them the ball and trust them to that point, like that's like the cutoff point of like they're no longer fun and could be anything. I'm moving on from them. Meanwhile, they're a seasoned veteran, and the coach is like, "Oh, he's a valuable part of our team." And I think that Pat Freiermuth can really return a lot of value given where he's being sitting right now.
So I don't want to use this as an opportunity to like pat myself on the back, but I remember going into that 2021 season, I was talking about Debo Samuel and Cooper Kupp as just huge values. And I got the same response from everybody. Like you're saying, like once these players finally start getting involved and people go, well, the upside isn't what I wanted to be. So now we're just going to forget about him. And they finished as the wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 that year. And that was right when everybody decided to sour on those 2 players that they inevitably ended up breaking out. So I'm not saying that Pat Freiermuth is going to come out here and give us a Cooper Kupp type of season, but it is something weird that people do. And Jeff, I tweeted about Pat Freiermuth on May 25th. So this was almost a month ago now when I was writing my tight end Dynasty rankings article. And I'll read the tweet word for word. I said, Pat Freiermuth's Dynasty value is wrong. In 2022, his consensus rank peaked at tight end 5. And then following an injury-plagued 2023, he logged his best fantasy season, finishing inside the top 10 last year, still just 26. His value is hanging at tight end 18. Now he's tight end 20. So, like, I don't get it. Aaron Rodgers signs there. George Pickens gets traded away, and then he still falls further down the rankings. I just, this is a huge head scratcher for me. I'm a big fan of Pat Freiermuth. And again, like I called out in the tweet, his dynasty value 2 years ago, he was the tight end 5 overall. And then he got hurt. and then he immediately bounced back to the same production we saw before, and his value didn't rebound. So that tells me that there's just something wrong with his value. Huge buy for me. Another guy that I've been drafting in a lot of leagues. Love that call out. I want to wrap up with a deep pull here. ADP 274. This is a guy that you can get in one of the last rounds of your dynasty startups, being valued as QB 43. Probably not a huge shock to a lot of people. Malik Willis, a guy that I've talked about as kind of the arbitrage Justin Fields, just a really good football player. Things didn't work out for him in Tennessee, obviously, but he got 2 starts last year, and one of those starts he finished as the QB6 on the week. The upside is there as a rusher, and he has just proven himself year after year to just be a consummate pro. Has done and said all the right things, has had kind of a tough start to his NFL career, whether it be falling on draft day or getting kind of pushed out of Tennessee, but seems like he still has a long career ahead of him. Whether that be as a backup who gets the occasional contingent start here and there, or whether he ends up finding his long-term home a few years down the road. I just want to bet on talented players, and I especially want to bet on quarterbacks that have rushing upside. So a young player that you can get pretty much for free in your dynasty drafts right now, I'm okay, even if I don't get any starts from him over the next couple of years, just keeping him stashed on my bench, because if the opportunity does arise, he's one of those guys that is going to have game-breaking upside.
Yeah, I did about a month ago. I did an AMA with our friends over at Reddit. So the Reddit Dynasty AMA there, and I got a question in that AMA. It was basically because like what backup quarterbacks should you be stashing? Because we know that there's upside and value potentially in backup quarterbacks, and Malik Willis is the type of player that you should be stashing. These players, like I think
Joe
that
Milton.
Joe Milton is obviously one. I mean, like Jimmy Garoppolo is like the type of player where it's like we've seen him be a starting quarterback before, and so like you would be with the Rams and potentially like these types of players that we've seen be successful in the league. And again, this is one of these things that I see a lot of the dynasty thought is around. Well, at least he hasn't not done it yet, like when given opportunity. So I'd rather go that direction. But meanwhile, it's like, well, but teams continue to trust them, and teams continue to, and when they are given opportunities, they do better than the first time. And despite maybe not lighting the world on fire the first time, not becoming a superstar the moment they walk on the field, that they can still turn it around. And much like we talked about Daniel Jones, like the Geno Smith, those types of players, Malik Willis is starting that path of you spend enough time in the league, you're a backup quarterback, you learn the offense, you understand the game starts moving slower, you get opportunities, you step in and you produce in those opportunities, and eventually your time comes calling that teams say, well, we did like him coming out, and now we need a quarterback here, and he's sitting here on the market, let's give him a shot. And Tyrod Taylor is a player that kind of, if you go back a ways, like kind of fits in that profile where he was the backup to Joe Flacco in Baltimore, and then he got his opportunity in Buffalo as a free agent. Buffalo said, hey, let's give it a shot. And he was a very good for fantasy terms for a couple of seasons. He was passable as the Bills quarterback. Obviously wasn't a long-term option. There's Bills quarterback. We've still seen him be a backup quarterback through the league. And when he starts, he gets opportunity and he produces for fantasy. Willis definitely has that type of game. And you're talking about a 274 overall, you're potentially your last pick in a deep league. It's a good call out here.
I had one more too, Jeff. I know we said we were going to give it 8, but let's give it 8.5.
You breaking rules, Dave.
I just want to mention this guy because he's a guy that I've drafted in a few leagues right now, and he comes even cheaper than Malik Willis. What do you think about Kenny Pickett? QB 45 right now, ADP of 327. He might be the week 1 starter for the Browns, and it might not be pretty, but this is a guy with first-round draft capital who, overstayed his welcome in Pittsburgh pretty quickly, but has bounced around to a few different teams now. Strikes me as one of those guys that's just going to be a backup for the next decade and is going to get a handful of starts here and there. So, these are the guys that I like that you can get that have some sort of pedigree that are just free at the end of your draft. And quarterbacks, as we know in Superflex, if they're starting, sometimes that's all you need. Well, Jeff, I want to thank you for the time today. I want to thank everybody who took the time to tune into this episode. We'll be back next week. Cannot remember what we're going to be talking about. Trades, dynasty trades. Yeah, we're going to talk about players to target in dynasty trades. We'll be doing that next week. And then we'll be talking about players to sell in trades as well. So next week is trade week. Be sure to tune in. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week.